The significance of the raid on the ship by the Israelis is going to be long-term, but almost immediately we see that this is a diplomatic and PR calamity for the Israelis. In the long run, it may force them to relax the embargo on Gaza or maybe lift it altogether, but it is certainly a victory they handed to Hamas and its allies. The most important implication of this raid is what it will mean for internal Israeli politics. All indications show that this was a decision taken by a small segment of the cabinet without the rest of the cabinet knowing about it. To me, it smacks of groupthink that we saw during the Bay of Pigs crisis, where alternative explanations, alternative courses of actions were not considered. And the reaction in Israel, despite the fact that there is a sense of you need to rally around the flag, you're being unfairly criticized for doing something that was in your right, even though the casualties happened, but there were also casualties on the Israeli side. There is a great deal of angst and questioning of the government action. It also, interestingly, coincides with a testimony given by the Israeli chief of intelligence, the Mossad chief, where he said that the importance of Israel to the United States is declining. So for the Israelis, there are a number of critical issues, one of which is the importance of the relationship with America. Everything else can go bad, but the relationship with America is always paramount. So if there's a perception that this government is undermining relations with America, and on top of that, that this is clearly a fiasco of enormous proportions, maybe it will force a change in the Israeli government. I mean, there are a couple of ways this can happen. One is that the Labour Party removes itself from it, and even in the Labour Party, Barak is being blamed for, the Labour Party leader, Barak is being blamed for the fact that this action did not succeed, because after all it was a military operation and he was a defense minister. So it is possible that the Labour Party will go through a major crisis, although it's a much weaker party now than it has ever been. And it is quite possible that there'll be a new government and Netanyahu will be forced to ditch some of his extreme right-wing colleagues and bring in Tzipi Livni, who will then say, Tzipi Livni is the main opposition leader of Kadima, and say, here are my conditions, take it, you have to take them, otherwise I'm not going in. So there may be changes, and that may actually be a good outcome from this crisis. The Turks responded quite negatively, obviously, since this was a Turkish operation from the beginning. The group that organized it is a Turkish Islamic charity and had a great deal of support in Turkey, especially from the governing party and other parties. So the fact that the ship was boarded and there were casualties, and some of them Turks, the Turks reacted very, very negatively, and they are trying to increase the pressure on the Israelis. Will Turkey be successful in its efforts to push for a strong international reaction? Yes. In the short run, it will be successful. The UN Security Council has a tendency of very quickly condemning the Israelis in such actions like that. I suspect the United States will abstain and will not veto any resolution. So on surface, yes, it will seem successful. In the long run, there are certain downsides for the Turks as well. What are the downsides? The downsides are that the Turks were heavily involved in pushing this flotilla, despite the fact that the Israelis over and over said they will not allow the flotilla to enter its territorial waters. the Turks pushed on. And when I say the Turks, that even the Turkish government would do nothing to stop a Turkish flotilla essentially from going in. So this was a provocation that was announced in advance, if you want. And why would another sovereign country create such a provocation when there are so many other issues at stake at the moment, including the fact that there was small progress starting on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations with George Mitchell and the administration's latest efforts. Turkish-Israeli relations were very strong in the 1990s and the early 2000s, but and certainly when the Turks were involved in Syrian-Israeli negotiations. However, this Turkish government was never very fond of Israel, and after the Gaza war in 2009, the relationship took a dive and have been deteriorating, with the Turks essentially trying to squeeze the Israelis in all different types of international fora, UN Security Council or IAEA, NPT review conference, and so on and so forth. But now I think this incident has given it what I would call a temporary death knell. It will be very, very, very hard for the relationship to even go back to the bad old days of yesterday. It's going to be hostile from now on. I think it will take a very, very long time for Turkish-Israeli relations to recover, and it will take for both governments to disappear from the scene one day. That is to say, even if the Benjamin Netanyahu government were to leave the scene tomorrow, as long as the AKP government is in power in Turkey, the relationship will be hostile. And the AKP government is likely to be in power in Turkey for a long time to come. What does this event mean for U.S.-Turkish relations? I think it's going to make the United States government more worried about Turkey. Not so much because Turkey is changing axes or something like that, but the fact that the Turks, in this particular instance, not only pushed the envelope and created a crisis when the United States did not want a crisis. Now, you can say that the Israelis mismanaged the whole crisis from the beginning, and I will stipulate to that. That goes without saying. But the Israelis were responding to a provocation, and to the extent that the United States is, at the moment, in very intricate negotiations on the Iran crisis and the Iran nuclear program. The Turks had already come up with this tripartite agreement with the Brazilians and the Iranians that Washington did not welcome. This makes the Iran negotiations even more complicated. It also completely undermines the George Mitchell negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It undermines the PA, the Palestinian Authority, at the expense, to the advantage of Hamas. It makes Hamas look stronger today. Therefore, all of these things are a major setback for U.S. policies. And there is no question that the U.S. administration is rather unhappy with both the Israelis and the Turks. The Israelis for the way they dealt with the raid, but the Turks for pushing this confrontation along. The peace process was already on life support, so it's not, but there were some signs of movement. There are a couple of things that are worth mentioning. Yes, negotiations had started. They're not in the same shape and form of yesterday. However, it was the beginning of something, and clearly Netanyahu's visit to Washington this week was intended to find a way of speeding up the negotiations. Even with Hamas, I was under the impression, and I don't know this for a fact, but the Israelis released a number of Hamas operatives recently, and I thought that maybe there was a deal in the making for the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, because that is the most important impediment for the Israelis to lift the siege on Gaza. And so it may be that this set of events completely pulled the rug under all these small, admittedly very small moves that were being undertaken, I suppose, with American guidance. And so whatever there was of the life support, I think at the moment, for the time being, it's dead.